September 10th, 1853. Dear Austin, I am writing you this letter tonight, but I won't be able to get down to Miller's store to mail it until I return. And I don't know when that'll be. I reckon you're going to be anxious about what I'm about to do. Austin and Miss Amelia will be too, when she finds out. Preacher Tully and Winston got back yesterday. They were gone 3 weeks. They did not find Darcy, nor a solid lead about where she might be. I was chopping wood today when Preacher Tully came by. I overheard him and Miss Amelia talking on the porch. Preacher Tully said that things were far worse than what he had first thought, and that Miss Amelia must not repeat what he'd about to tell her. I moved in closer to hear. Winston was owned by Simon Tate, the preacher said. Before he died, Tate willed that Winston should have his freedom, but Winston's wife, Delilah, and the children would have not been included in this stipulation. So when Simon Tate died, Winston was free, but his family was now owned by Mary Tate, Simon's widow. She promptly sold them to her brother-in-law, Henry Tate. It seemed that this Henry Tate was a mean-spirited evil man, and when he had Delilah whipped to death, Winston took the children and ran. He ran with them all the way to Pennsylvania. So you see, Darcy and Jupiter are not free. The preacher sighed heavy here and ran his fingers through his hair. They are still the property of Henry Tate. And that's not the worst of it. All we do know is that those slave catchers were from somewhere in North Carolina. We have no way of knowing who they were or where they might have taken Darcy. Without papers to prove she's a free person, or only to hope of getting Darcy back is to buy her. But we'd have to find her first. Oh, Austin, I had never thought things could be so bad. When I heard Miss Amelia about Jupiter, I held my breath to hear, for the preacher had lowered his voice to a whisper. He is in danger as well. Winston knows how slim his chances are of finding Darcy now. He's decided to get Jupiter out of Pennsylvania while he still has a chance of freedom. Canada is their only hope. They'll have to leave tomorrow night. With the slave catchers running across the borders into the free states and carrying people off, Pennsylvania is no longer safe. They've got to go farther north. I heard a horse and wheels and looked around the horses to see Winston and Jupiter pulling up in their wagon. Winston's usually straight, broad shoulders were slumped over and as if he had a heavy weight on them. His face was sadder than I've ever seen it. Jupiter was staring at the ground. I went over to the barn to wait for him. Miss Amelia and the preacher went to talk to Winston, and Jupiter climbed out and came looking for me. We went up to the hayloft to be alone. I told him that all I had heard and how I would hate for him to have to go to Canada, but he shook his head. What do you mean, no? I whispered. If your pa says you've got to go, Jupe, what else can you do? Jupiter put his head over his ear and then over his throat. Hear a song? I whispered. I tried to figure out what he was telling me. Why did he want to hear a song now? Then he leaned over and picked up his walking stick. Darcy, I cried. You want to hear Darcy sing? But how? He walked over to the window and pointed to the road leading away from the house. I knew then what he was planning. He was heading south rather than north. He was going to find Darcy. Once I understood this, I couldn't let him go alone. Now, you know that I've been further south than the Fenton farm, and I don't know what North Carolina will be like, but I can't sit here in Sudbury doing nothing, knowing that I was responsible for Darcy's kidnapping in the first place. So we hatched a plan to go together. The hard part for Jupiter will be leaving Whistle behind, but it would be too dangerous to take him along. I packed a sack with some things we'd need, my slingshot, my flask of hiccup remedy, and an old canteen for water, my knife, my flint rock for starting fires, some gingerbread and a napkin, and 2 pieces of rock candy. I'm also taking Reuben's old turnip head with me to work on when we've got time. I put some sheets of paper into the sack as well. I'll write you from the road and mail the letters when I return. I don't know when that'll be, Austin, and I hope you won't be worrying too much in the meantime. Jupiter is taking Darcy's walking stick with him. He aims to give it to her when he finds her. Traveling south is such a dangerous thing for Jupiter to be doing, and I wonder at his courage. I only hope we have enough between us to do what we're setting out to do. Nothing we ever did in our club seems as serious as this. I wish we had spent more time working on being real daredevils and not just pretending. If I ever needed advice, Austin, it's now. I wish you were here to tell me how to find the courage to be more than a hiccuping coward of a boy I feel to be tonight. Your brother, Levi. September 12th, 1853. Dear Austin, as much as so much has happened, I don't know where to begin. I suppose I should start with the night before last. When Jupiter and I left Sudbury, we met up back of the Heppel's cow barn after midnight and took off through the woods. Neither of us know how to get to North Carolina. All we know was that it was south of Sudbury. We walked toward the Fenton place, as when we got there we just kept on going, following along the canal. We slept under some pine trees along the bank, and next morning we ate the gingerbread along the rocky candy for our breakfast. After that, we walked along the canal until we met a barge that was heading south. A bargain man was friendly enough to offer to give us a ride downstream. I asked if he had seen a young girl with yellow ribbons and two men pass by, but he had not. Neither Jupiter nor I had ever been on a bargage before, and it was great fun to glide along the river. We'd off about 10 miles downstream, and the man threw us each a potato from a barrel for our supper. We walked some until we grew tired. As I write this, I'm sitting by a fire that we made from some birch twigs and a brush. The sun is going down, and we're roasting our potatoes and some ears of corn that we picked from the farmer's field. I even found an old licorice stick in my pocket, which we decided to eat first. We were both grinning at our food fortune as we chomped on the hard licorice when we heard an owl hooting in the sycamore tree over our head. I looked over at Jupiter. The smile had left his face, and his eyes searched the branches above us. I knew who he had thinking of. I'm thinking of her too. Could be they don't have any owls living down in the Carolinas, I said, trying to make him feel easier. Could be. His shrug seemed to answer. Or could they have gotten worse? His eyes seemed to say. We sat there for a long spell, just watching the fire and listening to the owl hooting at the moon. Your brother, Levi.